Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with another episode of Inside the Markets, and really excited to have a special guest, someone I followed his work for years, had the pleasure of meeting years ago. Great author, legendary investor, Mr. Jim Rogers, calling in from Asia today. So, Jim, great to see you. How is everything going today, my friend?
Well, if the truth be known, Chris, I have pneumonia. So I'm a little shocked. I haven't had pneumonia in 60 or 70 years, but I was in China traveling around a lot. And lo and behold, I come back to Singapore and the doctor says, "You better go to bed. You've got pneumonia." So other than that, I'm great. Other than that,
Well,
I'm great.
glad to hear, and I'll send some warm wishes for the recovery there and appreciate you joining me today. Obviously, amazing things happening in the world, which you've written about, spoken about for years. And now we see a lot of volatility in the stock market. So, to start things off, do you think we've reached the point where these bubbles are starting to pop under the influence of the higher interest rates, or where do you see things today?
Chris, you know that I'm not very good at market timing. You are the market timer and the guy who knows how to buy and sell. I always get it wrong. Yes, however, having said that, yes, I can see that there are problems developing. It seems to me that the market, I'm talking about the US market first, because other markets are different, but the US market seems to be making a top over the last year, say, or several months. We seem to be making a complicated top, and that I would suspect by this time next year, some of us are going to say, oh my gosh, look what happened. And the reason, part of the reason I say that, Chris, is the way bear markets start. They always start when somebody's not looking, or nobody's looking,
Right.
in fact. In 2007, Iceland went bankrupt. Nobody knew it could or knew what it was. Nobody paid attention. Then Ireland went bankrupt a few weeks later. And then a few weeks after that, Bear Stearns went bankrupt. And a few weeks after that, Northern Rock in the UK went bankrupt. And a few weeks after that, Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. By then, it was on the evening news. There's something wrong here. But it always works that way. It starts, it snowballs, it rolls from one place to another. There are places where things to be going wrong right now. So I would suspect by this time next year, we'll all know, oh gosh, what do we do now?
Yeah, it certainly seems like we're headed that way. And curious if, again, obviously the timing's a tricky variable, yet I keep looking at the rising interest rates, the effect that that has, especially when you've put all of the credit into an economy. Do you feel that's the driving reason of why we're starting to see real estate market, stock market finally slow down at this particular time?
Well, probably. That's the obvious solution or answer, and it's probably right. However, there may be something else we don't know about, and 5 years from now, we'll look back and say, oh, yeah, interest rates were a factor, but there was also whatever X might be. Since 2008, debt has gone through the roof all over the world, all over the world. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet alone has gone up by 500% in 10 years.
Yeah.
I mean, Chris, that's something that if you'd said that 20 years ago, 30 years ago, people would have walked out of the room. They said, this guy's nuts. A central bank can't increase his balance sheet by 500% in 10 years, especially a major central bank. But our central bank has done it. So, yes, the debt situation is staggering. And when interest rates go higher, we're going to have some big bankruptcies. I mean, the state of California could go bankrupt. You pick it. You pick whatever you want to. There are lots of people that are very vulnerable when interest rates go higher.
Right. Although, any thoughts on the commentary in the last couple of weeks where now seems like the Federal Reserve is finally starting to feel the pain, signaling that they may slow down the interest rate increases and how that would affect things going forward?
Well, I know that's going to happen because the way our world works, the central bank is made up of bureaucrats and academics. Most of them don't have a clue what they're doing, and when things go bad, people call up and say, "You must save us." And the central bank says, why? It says, well, it's Western civilization if you don't save us. In other words, save me. And Trump is already screaming at them, you must save us. So unfortunately, the days with people like William McChesney Martin, who was a great central banker in America, or even Paul Volcker, who knew what had to be done, These guys knew how the world works. We don't have those guys anymore, or those women anymore. Mrs. Yellen, what, 3 years ago said there'll never be a financial problem again. We're never going to have an economic problem in our lifetimes. Oh my gosh. I mean, what more do you know? What more do you need to know when you have people like that running the central bank? And
Yeah, it's
by the way, it's just one interruption again. Mrs. Yellen yesterday or day before has said, "Oh, there are huge problems in the world." I mean, the audacity of that woman. She caused the problems, and now she's suddenly saying, "Oh, there are problems, and we could have a serious problem."
yeah, it's almost like Alan Greenspan, who was a gold bug hanging out with Ayn Rand, then went into the Fed chairman position, printed money, and then even now criticizes Bernanke, which hard to reconcile that. Although with Bernanke and the Fed and these bubbles that they've inflated, obviously a lot of money in the system, although with the relationship between the US and China, which I think you're more qualified to speak to than most in the world, hear a lot about credit issues in China as well. Is that accurate? We hear of the ghost cities, a lot of credit out there. Are they facing some of the same kinds of issues?
Well, yes, China's going to have problems the next time around. I'm bullish on China. I moved to Asia, so my children could speak Chinese and would know Asia. But yes, Chris, in 2008, China had huge amounts of money saved for a rainy day. It started raining, they started spending the money and helped save the world. But now even China has debt. China has a lot of debt. So in the next time around, you're going to see Chinese companies with debt that deal with the West are going to go bankrupt. But the good news is Beijing has said we're going to let them go bankrupt. Now, I hope they mean it. In America, we don't let people go bankrupt. But in
Right.
China, they say they're going to let people go bankrupt. I hope so. It will be a shock to a lot of people, including me. And I just told you it's going to happen. But no, you're going to see bankruptcies in China because they have a lot of debt now. But just to interrupt you for one more time, America became the most successful country in the 20th century. But along the way, we had 15 depressions, a horrible civil war, very little rule of law, massacres in the streets, and yet we became extremely successful. So while I'm bullish on China, I know there are going to be some serious problems there and everywhere else.
Yeah, it's certainly a fascinating dynamic, of course, especially with the trade war going on, which has been baffling to me in the sense of usually when you have your largest creditor and you're the most indebted organization in history, it doesn't make sense to antagonize them. I'm curious your thoughts where I get the argument that China, it's not in their best interest just to slam a big pile of treasuries and crash the market because then they take a loss. Yet at the same time, if pushed into a corner, it seems like they do have a very powerful weapon to respond with. Curious if you're seeing it the same way, and if you see if the US keeps pushing, would they ever consider using that?
Well, they already are worried about the debt situation in the U.S. They're worried about their own debt situation, and they're taking steps to correct it. But they're certainly worried about. I mean, Chris, America's the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. Not the largest debtor nation in the world, the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. And it's going up every day. It's going up as you and I speak. It's astonishing. And they know that. And they're worried about it. Of course they are. Uh, would they dump? I don't see them dumping unless they need to for some reason, but they can certainly let them mature and let them run off. Certainly not written in their in their rules that they have to buy U.S. Treasury bonds.
Right.
But whether they do it or not, there are plenty of other problems that can cause problems, including the trade war. You asked before, were rising interest rates going to be the main problem? And they're going to be serious. But trade war, Chris, I mean, nobody's ever won a trade war, and trade wars have never been good for anybody. So that could be another problem. And all of these things coming together, when you have bear markets, everything goes wrong. When a bull market, everything goes right. Bad news comes out, and everybody says, don't worry, we can solve that. Stocks go up. Bear markets, bad news starts coming out, and people say, oh my gosh, guess what just happened? and then something else happens, and it gets worse and worse. That's the way bear markets are. They're not fun, but that's the way they are.
Yeah, sure seems like the blood is on the street or rapidly approaching it. Curious, your thoughts. Earlier this year, China developed a petro yuan, which seemingly would be a big step, especially with the petrodollar being a large base of the dollar power. I'm curious if you followed that much, have any thoughts on how that's going and whether that could really take power away.
Well, uh, the world is now looking for a way to get away from the U.S. dollar and the IMF and the World Bank because they have a huge amount of power and they give the U.S. a huge amount of power because of the U.S. dollar and because of our voting rights. And people are starting to say, wait a minute, this is not right. This is not right. If America gets angry at you, they can ruin you. So Russia, China, several countries are all trying to figure out a way to come up with a new currency and new institutions. They've started a bank in Asia, which has scores of members to compete with the World Bank and the IMF. And they're trying to develop new currencies. So your development, this development you mentioned, is one step in that process. How it's going to wind up, I don't know. But I do know there's gigantic amounts of money and population that are trying to figure out ways to compete with the US dollar, compete with the World Bank, compete with the IMF. So, and in bear markets, there are always great changes.
Right.
So I'm sure this one's going to have great changes too. I don't like saying this, by the way, Chris. I'm an American like you are, but I have to face facts. And the facts are that a lot of people are unhappy with the way America pushes its weight around. You saw what just happened in Vancouver. They arrested that Chinese woman. I mean, a woman, whatever she did is legal in China. Whatever she did is legal in many parts of the world. But America says you broke an American law. American, and this is the attitude that people in the world have. Maybe not in America, they don't have this attitude, but people say, well, wait a minute. If I break a law, if I do something you say is against American law, you're going to come and arrest me. I mean, Chris, as you know, it's legal to drink wine in California. If I drink wine in California, does that mean that Pakistan is going to come and arrest me somewhere
Right.
because I broke one of their laws? I mean, this is to me, it's insanity, and it's certainly insanity to many people in the world now.
Yeah, it's incredible. Obviously, you've seen this for a bit longer than I have, but growing up and seeing the way US policy is implemented, and now countries actually responding, whether it's the petro yuan or Russia dumping their treasuries earlier this year. And it seems like the frustration is growing and is now being expressed financially. And when I think about it, I wonder how it all adds up where the debts are just skyrocketing. And I'm curious if there, I can't see another way outside of some reset, whether we have the implicit just monetize things by printing or get interesting Trump with his bankruptcy experience. So is there any other way that you see this playing out, or what am I missing here?
Well, you're certainly right that something's going to happen, and it's not going to be fun for most of us. No question about that, because the debt doesn't go away. Now, bankruptcy, Mr. Trump's certainly very experienced at bankruptcy, as you well point out. But the idea that America's going to go and swap its bonds, and he once mentioned that. I mean, I don't think the rest of the world is going to sit around and say, what a wonderful idea, Mr. Trump. You're bankrupting us to save you. I don't think it could happen. Sure, anything can happen, especially in bear markets and especially when countries go deep into debt and have serious problems. But that's a very bad bear market you're talking about, Chris. The scenarios you just outlined will wipe out many insurance companies, wipe out many banks, wipe out many endowments. So yeah, it could happen, and something's going to happen. I guess that would be better than a war, which is another way that people sometimes solve these problems. But I don't see any good solutions at all.
Yeah, and makes you wonder. I was listening to one of your interviews earlier tonight where you talked about how when these moments finally come, everything gets sold off. Certainly, we've seen the dollar and the treasury rallying, but at some point, it seems like this will reverse in a big way as the nature of the markets eventually takes over going forward.
Well, it's always happened that way. I mean, if I told you that it's different this time, you should hang up the phone right now because it's not different. And bear markets have always been horrendous and strange things have happened. Bear Stearns went bankrupt. Lehman Brothers has been around over 150 years. Over 150 years. Gone. Bear markets do strange things.
Yeah, they sure do. And perhaps the last question about gold and silver and commodities. Again, a lot of the gold and silver bugs. I remember when we met on the New York Stock Exchange, you took a silver ounce out of your pocket. I was happy because I had just bought my 1,000-ounce block, so I knew I was finally getting something right. But obviously, people who've seen the money printing yet bought gold and silver see the prices on the lower side. Curious if you have any thoughts why those haven't responded as much as many people have thought, and if that's still where you're looking going forward along with the other commodities.
Well, I own gold and silver, but I haven't bought any serious gold or silver since 2010. But I own it. I own plenty. Don't worry. If gold goes up, I'm going to make a lot of money. But my view, and I don't know anything about trading, but there was a big blow off in gold in 2011, and nearly always after you have a big blow off, call it a bubble, call it whatever you want to call it, there's a long period of adjustment. Nearly no matter what the market, no matter where, whether we're talking commodities or stocks or anything. My view is that blow off is now working its way out, and that if and when gold goes under 1,000, which would be it would be down over 50% from its blow off top, which often happens, then I would be, I hope, smart enough to buy a lot of gold and silver. I'm not buying any now. I'm watching. I haven't bought any for a long time, as I say, but I certainly haven't sold. So when that happens, if it happens, I hope I'm smart enough to buy a lot. And the reason I say it could happen if we have a bear market. In 2008, gold went down a lot. Gold went down a lot. In previous bear markets, gold has gone down a lot. Now, there comes a time when it goes down less, and then people swamp in to say, hey, let's buy gold and silver to save ourselves. So that time will come. My view, that time will come, and I hope I'm smart enough to be one of those guys who comes in and says, I'm getting me a lot of gold now.
Yeah.
Because before this is over, Chris, whenever people lose confidence in governments and in money, they always buy gold and silver. Academics will say all day long, that's crazy. Maybe it's crazy, but for thousands of years, all of us poor peasants who don't know it's crazy rush in to buy gold and silver. And I will be one of those poor peasants buying gold and silver, I hope.
Well, there's few people I have more confidence in to be able to spot when that moment occurs. Certainly seems like we're building towards that. And perhaps just in wrapping up, I know you have a new blog and YouTube channel, and perhaps you just let folks know where they can find you and stay up to date on all the great things you're doing and get some of those great books right in time for Christmas. They make great presents.
Well, I'm jimrogers.com, but don't worry, I'm not here to sell things, Chris. I just wanted to have another good conversation with you. And I'm delighted we did it again.
Well, I sure appreciate that. It's been great learning from you over the years, and I appreciate that you share all this information with folks for what's coming. And that said, go get some rest and feel better. Thanks for joining me today, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. I hope we can do it again sometime.